The year is 02 AD in Rome, the most powerful empire on earth. Something catastrophic is about to unfold. A 19-year-old boy dies under mysterious circumstances, and suddenly the entire Roman world teeters on the edge of chaos. His death sets off a chain reaction that will reshape the destiny of millions. This is the story of Lucius Caesar, the golden heir everyone thought would inherit Romana. Why his sudden death nearly destroyed everything Augustus built. But here's the shocking part. Nobody knows exactly what killed him. Was it disease, murder, divine punishment? The answer changes everything we know about Roman politics. The Roman Empire in 02 AD stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia. Emperor Augustus, now in his 60s, had spent 4 decades transforming Rome from a war-torn republic into a stable superpower. He'd ended the civil wars, established peace, and created a governmental system that made Rome the envy of the ancient world. But Augustus had one critical problem. He needed someone to follow him. Succession wasn't guaranteed. Any weakness, any hint of instability, and Rome could collapse back into the bloody civil wars that had nearly destroyed civilization itself. Augustus had carefully planned his succession like a master chess player. He adopted Lucius Caesar as his grandson and heir, grooming him from childhood for the ultimate responsibility. Lucius represented everything Rome needed: youth, vigor, Augustus's bloodline, and the promise of continuity. Young Romans loved him. The Senate respected him. Even the common people saw hope in his future. Coins were minted with his face. Temples were dedicated in his name. He was destiny personified, or so everyone believed. Lucius Caesar was born into incomparable privilege. His great-grandfather was Julius Caesar, the man who conquered Gaul and essentially created the Roman Empire as a superpower. His grandfather was Augustus, literally Rome's first emperor. Being descended from such titans meant everything. From his earliest days, Lucius was surrounded by the finest tutors, military strategists, and philosophers. Augustus himself took personal interest in his education, understanding that Rome's future depended on raising a worthy successor. Unlike some privileged heirs who squander their advantages, Lucius appeared genuinely dedicated to his role. He studied military strategy relentlessly, preparing for the day he'd command Rome's legions. He learned rhetoric and philosophy, subjects essential for an emperor. He made public appearances where crowds gathered to see him, reinforcing his legitimacy. Even his personality seemed tailor-made for leadership. He was charming, diplomatic, and genuinely interested in the welfare of the people. Romans felt confident about their future with him. But Augustus wasn't naive. He'd learned hard lessons about succession planning. He had another heir waiting in the wings, Tiberius, his stepson, a seasoned military commander with decades of experience. Having 2 potential successors created tension, but it also provided insurance. If Lucius failed, Tiberius stood ready. This wasn't mentioned openly. It would undermine Lucius's position, but the political elite understood the backup plan existed. It was a safety net, nothing more. In 02 AD, Lucius was just entering the prime of his life. He was about to receive a major military command in the East, a crucial stepping stone toward eventually ruling Rome. This appointment represented the culmination of everything Augustus had been building. Lucius would prove himself in battle, gain military experience, and return to Rome as a legendary war hero. The plan was flawless. The future was secure. Then everything changed. In the summer of 02 AD, As Lucius traveled toward his military post in the east, something went terribly wrong. While staying in the city of Marseille on the southern coast of Gaul, Lucius suddenly fell ill. At first, nobody panicked. Young men sometimes caught fevers. They recovered. Physicians were summoned, and the best medical knowledge of the ancient world was brought to bear. But Lucius didn't improve. His condition deteriorated rapidly. The details of his illness are frustratingly vague to modern historians because ancient sources don't clearly specify what disease struck him down. Some accounts mention fever, others hint at plague symptoms, some suggest poisoning. The uncertainty itself became historically significant because it meant different people could interpret his death to support their political agendas. Was Rome being punished by the gods? Was someone assassinating the heir? Had the young man simply been unlucky? The mystery transformed his death from tragedy into international incident. Augustus heard the news with the shock of a man watching his life's work crumble. His carefully designed succession plan, perfected over decades, suddenly faced its greatest test. He sent physicians, priests offering prayers, and desperate messages of support, but nothing helped. Lucius's condition continued spiraling downward. Rome held its breath. The empire's stability rested entirely on one teenager's recovery. In a world without modern medicine, where infections killed without mercy, the outcome seemed increasingly inevitable. Word spread throughout Rome like wildfire. Senators whispered in the forum. Soldiers discussed the matter in barracks. Common people prayed in temples. Everyone understood what Lucius's death would mean. Without a clear heir, Rome risked everything. Civil war could return. Ambitious generals might fight for power. Families could be destroyed fighting over the throne. The peace and stability Augustus had spent 40 years building hung by a thread, and nobody could stop what was coming. On August 20th, 02 AD, Lucius Caesar died in Marseille. The golden heir, the future of Rome, the embodiment of Augustus's legacy gone. He was 19 years old. The empire received the news like a physical blow. In Rome, the Senate fell silent. In the provinces, soldiers wondered what came next. Among the common people, fear spread like poison. The stability they'd known their entire lives suddenly felt fragile. Augustus's grief was profound and public. The man who'd built an empire, who'd manipulated situations with brilliant political calculation, broke down. He'd lost his grandson, yes, but he'd also lost the future. He'd lost the carefully planned succession. He'd lost control of what came next. At 62 years old, Augustus suddenly looked every bit his age. The burden of Rome's fate crashed down on him with new weight. Rome's people watched their emperor grieve, and they understood the crisis was real. The political implications hit immediately. Lucius had been the primary successor, the chosen heir. Now he was gone. There was another candidate waiting, Tiberius, Augustus's stepson. Tiberius was everything Lucius wasn't: older, battle-hardened, experienced, and politically difficult. He'd spent years commanding Rome's armies on the northern frontier, making him invaluable, but also making him dangerous. Some senators wanted him, others feared him. Tiberius himself seemed reluctant, more concerned with his military duties than political maneuvering. But Tiberius wasn't the only option. Other ambitious men sensed opportunity. Could anyone challenge Augustus's choice? Could younger members of the imperial family make claims? Could wealthy senators maneuver their way into power? Rome's political system was built on the fiction that the Senate still held ultimate authority, even though everyone knew Augustus made real decisions. Without clear succession, that fiction could collapse. Ambitious men began calculating. Factions began forming. What had been a stable empire teetered toward instability. Augustus faced an agonizing decision. He needed to name a successor quickly, before ambitious men caused irreversible damage. But choosing Tiberius meant acknowledging that the young, vigorous heir had failed. It meant embracing an older man who'd never been the favorite. It meant admitting that his decades of grooming Lucius had been wasted preparation. Yet not choosing Tiberius meant leaving Rome's succession genuinely uncertain, which could trigger the very chaos everyone feared. The political calculation was brutally complex. If Augustus named Tiberius but made it seem reluctant or conditional, he'd weaken the succession and embolden rivals. If he named Tiberius wholeheartedly, he'd be publicly rejecting his preferred plan, which could undermine confidence. If he delayed the choice, ambitious senators would grow bolder. If he announced succession too quickly, it might look like he'd been planning to abandon Lucius all along, suggesting previous political deception. Augustus adopted Tiberius formally, making him the legal heir. But he did so with all the grace of a man choosing between terrible options. His public statements carried an undertone of resignation. He praised Tiberius's military skills, but emphasized necessity rather than enthusiasm. He spoke of trusting Tiberius to protect Rome, but phrased it like assigning a burden rather than offering an opportunity. Two Roman ears attuned to political messaging, these subtle differences meant everything. They suggested Augustus was making the best of a bad situation, not joyfully embracing his new successor. Tiberius understood the subtext perfectly. He was now officially the heir to Rome's throne, but with the qualifications everyone could hear. He'd be expected to manage the empire, lead armies, and govern millions, but always with the understanding that he was the backup plan, the second choice, the compromise option. This wasn't how any man wanted to be perceived, as he inherited the world's most powerful position. For Augustus, the solution brought stability, but at the cost of setting up the next succession crisis. Rome was secured, but the seeds of future problems were planted. Tiberius ruled Rome from 14 AD until 37 AD, a reign of over 20 years. He was a competent emperor in many ways. His military skills were genuine, his dedication to Rome sincere, and his administrative abilities solid. But he never escaped the shadow of being the second choice, never escaped the implicit comparison to what Lucius might have been. This psychological reality shaped his entire reign. Tiberius grew increasingly paranoid about rivals, increasingly suspicious of senators, increasingly concerned that people didn't truly support him. The consequences rippled through Roman history. Tiberius withdrew from public life more than Augustus ever had, spending his later years on the island of Capri, away from Rome's political machinery. This distance from power created vacuums that ambitious men filled. Corruption increased. Court intrigues became Byzantine in complexity. The Senate, sensing a weaker hand than Augustus's, pushed for more autonomy. Tiberius responded by becoming more authoritarian. What had been a relatively stable system under Augustus began developing cracks. More immediately, Lucius's death meant no one else in the direct Augustan bloodline stood ready to succeed Tiberius. When Tiberius died, the succession crisis exploded again. The emperor became Caligula, a young man only distantly related to Augustus, known for unstable behavior and ruthless consolidation of power. Then Claudius, then Nero, Each succession became a political earthquake because the system never developed clear rules. Lucius's death, in other words, meant not just one succession crisis in 02 AD, but generations of uncertainty afterward. The empire endured, but its character changed. Augustus had created a system that looked like it would work smoothly, delegating carefully and planning succession. But when that succession broke, the flaws appeared everywhere. Rome needed stronger institutions, clearer rules, more transparent succession processes. Instead, it relied on powerful individuals making crucial choices. Lucius's death exposed these weaknesses and accelerated Rome's gradual evolution toward the more militaristic, authoritarian state it would become during the later empire. While this succession drama unfolded in Rome, the rest of the world was developing in parallel. In China, the Han Dynasty was at its peak. The Silk Road was beginning to connect East and West, though neither civilization knew the other yet. Goods, ideas, and religions would eventually flow along these routes. But in 02 AD, China and Rome remained effectively separate worlds. Each thought their civilization was the center of human achievement. Each was partially right. In Judea, a young Jewish man would soon begin a ministry that would transform world history, though nobody in Rome or China paid attention at the time. Jesus Christ was likely around 20 years old in 02 AD, living in Nazareth, unknown and unnoticed. His death and the movement it sparked would eventually challenge Rome's power more fundamentally than any military force. The irony: Rome's succession crisis in 02 AD was insignificant compared to the religious revolution beginning in the same year, yet Romans were completely unaware. The broader context matters because it shows how history works. Lucius Caesar's death felt like the most important event in the world to Romans. It genuinely was crucial to their immediate future. But from a larger historical perspective, it was one crisis among many unfolding simultaneously. The Han Dynasty in China, the religious movements beginning in Judea, the slow development of trade networks. These would prove more historically significant than which man inherited Rome's throne. Yet for Romans living in 02 AD, Lucius's death was absolutely central. It shaped their politics, their succession, their future. This duality, that events can be simultaneously crucial and minor depending on perspective, defines history itself. Lucius Caesar died unknown to most humans alive. Nobody outside Rome cared. But within Rome, his death mattered desperately. He remains a historical footnote today, but he was the linchpin of his world. Understanding Lucius means understanding how history actually works, full of local catastrophes, individual tragedies, and political earthquakes that reshape immediate futures while leaving barely a trace on distant posterity.